So we're joined by Rob for a 2-book special. We've never done this before, but Rob's book is just such a brilliant book. Obviously, we were going to get together and talk about that. And then we couldn't talk about the protagonist, Maurice Wilson, from The Moth and the Mountain. And I thought there was a certain similarity between the two of them. So I wanted to ask Rob about his thoughts on our other book that some of us have read this year. So if you're a bit confused, we have 2 basic subscriptions. We've got Adventurous Inc., which sends a book every month. And then we've got Deep Ink as well. And every other month we send an extra deep read. So over my shoulder here are most of the other deep reads that we've done. But Rob's book, Waypoints, was on deep read for November and December. So that's why we're talking about 2 books. We're talking about Rob's book, and we're going to talk about The Moth and the Mountain. So the way it works is, well, I'm going to ask some questions. I've got a stack of questions here, but actually, you guys are as welcome to ask questions as I am. So ask them in the chat. If you've got any of those fancy Q&A things, don't bother with that. Just ask your questions in the chat. I'll probably throw it in. But you might, if you want to ask the question yourself, you're welcome to ask questions yourself. I might just ask you beforehand. I did ask someone that once, and she said, "No, I'm in the bath." So probably not the best. So there we go. Right, let's crack on. I get the feeling we might run over slightly tonight with 2 books to talk about. Rob, are you up against a hard 9 o'clock?
No, fine. I should just say thank you so much. Well, firstly, for having me on, and really awesome to meet you all. It's such an amazing community. It's yeah, really excited to be part of it and to chat.
Well, honestly, Rob, it is our absolute pleasure. You know, we get so much from these books, but being able to sit down of an evening and actually have a chat with the author is what makes it special, really. So folk, do chip in with your questions. Basically, we're going to talk a bit about The Moth and the Mountain. We're going to get that out of the way to start off with. Then we're going to talk about Rob's book, and we're going to talk about Rob and writing the book and his history and the other things that he does, because he's not just an author. Lots of the people we talk to are I hesitate to say just writers, but that's their main gig. Rob has got other gigs, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about his adventures in West Africa and kind of what he learned from it and why he did it. And that will easily take us past 9 o'clock. So we might run on for 10 minutes or so. I'm not going to crash it hugely. But Rob, thank you for talking about both books. Really, your book was so brilliant. But when I read The Moth and the Mountain and its protagonist Maurice Wilson, who just this crazy idea that he can be the first person to summit Everest by crashing a plane on its slopes and then walking to the top. I mean, what a crazy idea. But I definitely get a sense that you're a bit of a kindred spirit with Maurice in some regards. I think that idea of, you know, I get the sense that once you've got an idea in your head, you're like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do, and you press on and do it. Did you feel a bit of a kindred spirit with Maurice? Does that resonate with you?
I mean, it's very kind. I mean, I think what Maurice Wilson did is a completely different league to anything I've ever done. And actually, when I read the book, I found it just jaw-dropping. Actually, the 2 things that really I found most engaging about him was, one, the way an idea kind of took root in his mind, and then it just became this obsession which nothing else he would let get in the way. And when he was taking that flight, teaching himself to fly a plane in the 30s, and then flying from sort of UK, hopping basically airport to airport, and not even proper airports, having the courage and the almost the wherewithal and the pluck to kind of do it. I haven't read a story like that. Someone, in a sense, who's so unprepared for something and against all the odds got so close. Just to be clear, has everyone read the book? There's gonna be no spoilers. We can kind of talk about what happens at the end.
We can assume that folk have read the book. It's fine. Most folk got it at the start of the month. There will be some folk who got it for Christmas. But I mean, there's no spoilers to say that Maurice isn't with us anymore. I mean, that's spoilers. But no, don't worry about that.
But I think that bravery and that courage and that determination, I just found so inspiring. Actually, I haven't read about an adventure like that for many, many years. And actually, it was really interesting reading about Reinhold Messner. He's an amazing climber. What he was saying, that Maurice Wilson was like a reference point for him, and thinking about what it felt like to be at the camp halfway up Everest and completely on your own, knowing that no one had ever done it before, and still thinking, I'm going to go on, and ultimately to his death. And I don't, what drives that mentality I find so interesting, and why did he care so much? What was he really looking for? And I think there's so many interesting, and Ed Caesar does it really well, so many interesting elements to the psychology of that that just made it a fascinating story. And actually I really want to read more. I finished that book actually yesterday, and I just wanted to learn more about him. I wanted to really understand, because the book's really brilliantly written, and you can read it quite quickly, I found. But definitely I wanted to know everything there is to know about him now, because I just found him such an intriguing person.
And I'd not heard about him before. Is it someone you'd come across before?
No, I'd never heard about him. And I'm not my dad was a kind of not a mountaineer at that level, but did a lot of mountaineering, and my house is where my mum lives is full of my dad's old like mountaineering books, like biographies of all of these mountaineers. Our house is full of his old climbing equipment, pictures, and I'd never come across him either. And I think he's well, I don't think he was relatively obscure, I think.
Yeah, but like you say, just this powerful story about what happens when you really believe that you can do something. Because the way he prepared for it was quite out of its time, really, wasn't it? With his fasting and his strength building exercises. And for me, that's all part of that same psyche. And I can definitely see a lot of you in that, in the way that you were preparing for your trek. There seemed to be a bit of a, I guess we'll talk about it a bit more when we come to yours, but that you need to get obsessed by it, don't you? It needs to possess you and become all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a journey like that, and the book goes into it a little bit when it's looking at how he was during the war, and I suppose that period of time, or that era, there was so much change, and maybe there was so much kind of, I suppose, trauma that came out of the stuff he experienced during the war. I mean, I found it so hard to understand really what took root in his mind and what made him think this is kind of possible. But the way he went about it was the bit I found most interesting, because that was the bit I could relate to a little bit. I think the thing about, I suppose, of walking and taking a long walk, and one of the ideas I try and really explore in Waypoints is like how it's just kind of taking one step and then another step, and actually by doing that you can just force yourself over immense distances, and ultimately that can be a really transformative thing. And definitely when he was overcoming every obstacle and then just keeping on going, whether it's disguising himself when he was walking out of Darjeeling, or whether it's refusing to give in to all of the guys who are saying you can't fly, it's just, he never seemed to, he was just so focused on, let's just break through that next barrier and then it'll be all right. And actually that mindset got him so close, and it's unbelievable in a way that he got that close. If you looked at him, when he'd just come up with the idea, probably if you asked everyone he'd ever met at that point how far he'd get, no one would have believed he would have got to, as high up as he did on the slopes of Everest. And I think that mindset is so powerful. I actually found it really inspiring. I mean, there's a load of things you could say about him that, that whole Western idea of conquering a mountain, and, there is problematic, and there's lots of elements of that I don't, support, I suppose. But actually, when you look at the raw courage it takes to go and do what he tried to do, I just think it's really awe-inspiring.
And I think I'd never connected the dots, actually, but I think because he came at that, because conquest was such a thing of its time, wasn't it? It was very of the era. But because he came at it from such a different approach, I think that's probably why no one's really known how to tell that story properly until maybe this modern time, when we don't accept quite so naturally that conquest is a good thing, and yes, you should want to climb to the top of everything, especially the highest thing on the planet. maybe his approach was, even though that's still what he was looking to do, maybe because his approach was so out there, it just didn't fit with the prevailing narrative of what adventure was about in that time.
I think that's definitely right. And even I suppose at that time, everyone was from whatever, the officer class, or the people who were taking on these kind of adventures, or that age of exploration, which is very problematic in lots of ways, but they were probably a certain type and they'd been to a certain school or whatever. And it's something, again, Caesar talks about in the book, but it makes him all the more remarkable that he wasn't from that background, and he probably had a whole load of other barriers, but he's still just up for it and went for it. And actually he's just such an intriguing person. I find it really hard to imagine. There were points when I was reading it and I found it so hard to understand how he kept going, like what it was in him that allowed him to keep going. What was he drawing upon? Because there's something in certain people that they somehow managed to draw on a strength that doesn't seem to be there or isn't accessible to most of us. And he's someone who I thought just seemed to have that in a way that was very hard to understand. I'm doing a race it's a running race in the Pennines starts in about 12 days. It's called the Spine Race, and it's a kind of continuous race. You start in Eder in Derbyshire, and it's 270 miles, and you run through across the Pennines in winter. And definitely reading that book, I think, is going to be a real source of inspiration for me, because I know there'll be moments during that you kind of sleep out when you're running, and it'll probably take 120 hours or something. But I know there'll be lots of points in that where I'm like, oh, I just don't want to go on, or it's so cold, or I'm having to bivvy somewhere. And actually just think to where he was and how he just had that, just will to keep going at all costs. And I do think it's a really, I think I actually find it really useful. And I don't say that in like a cheat, and it sounds a bit corny saying that, but actually one of those people who like genuinely, really inspiring.
Oh, brilliant! Well, I'm so pleased that you can take some, and that's I guess that's what I want from all of these books that we share and that we read is there is so much in them that we can take from them and put into our own lives. So that's brilliant to hear. But that's the exact reason why I thought you'd be an interesting person to talk about, because you talk glowingly about you don't understand where he finds the drive to keep going, but he clearly does, and uses that to power himself on. And I got a really big sense of that from your approach, because all of us, most of us tuned into this conversation are probably thinking, well, how did Rob power his way through his epic trek? And that's facing the trials that you faced within that it shows the same level of determination and more than that, like a spirit of enterprise as well, because I think Maurice shows tremendous enterprise in how he faces up to a problem and then works his way around it. None of it is ever a dead end. And for me, that's a very enterprising approach. And so I'm using that word enterprise because very quickly, before we talk about the book, I want to talk about a little bit about Tribe, because you're also the founder and CEO of Tribe Bars. And I know the walk in Waypoints wasn't the thing that ultimately crystallized it, but that was part of it, wasn't it? It emerged from the time that you're in. Tell us a little bit about that and how you came to found Tribe and what you're trying to do with it.
So Tribe is, I suppose Tribe's three things. We make energy bars, so nutrition products for energy and recovery. We have a community, so we put on lots of events, running and cycling mainly, where people can join and come and have adventures. And then we have a charity alongside the business, which supports the victims of human trafficking and looks to fight human trafficking, disrupt it from happening. And it all sort of grew out of actually a 1,000-mile run called Run for Love, which I set up with two friends, and the three of us did this run. And it was an amazing run that went from Odessa in Ukraine to Dubrovnik in Croatia, to across kind of 9 countries in Eastern Europe. And the whole idea the run initially began as a kind of personal challenge, I guess, to try and see if we could run 1,000 miles in 30 days. And then we met this charity who were looking to build a home that provided dedicated kind of rehabilitative care for child trafficking victims. And we quite quickly realized with three of us, we'd never raise enough money to build the home. And so we, I guess, had the idea of kind of Forrest Gump and seeing if we could get more runners involved. And it, cut a long story short, it kind of morphed into this kind of tribe of runners where we had like 250 people joining for stages of the run. And it became this really amazing project to be part of, and Tribe grew out of that. Partly our frustration as amateur runners with the kind of synthetic sugar-filled energy stuff that was marketed to us, and then partly also wanting to build a community around a product. So to build a brand that was rooted in a group of people and with a clear kind of social mission. And so we kept the kind of the community and the anti-human trafficking work. And really, I don't know, we've been going for almost 6 years now, and never growing as fast as we'd wanted, but always growing and, trying to make ourselves better and improve. And one of the things really excitingly, we've just hit a kind of raising £1 million to fight human trafficking earlier in October. So we've it's been a really amazing thing to be part of, and definitely probably shares a lot of things with Adventurous Inc. in terms of the group of people that are part of Tribe are all really into adventure, and I suppose believe in the power of those kind of journeys in a wider sense.
And I think it's so important that people build businesses around a purpose like that, because it's easy to build a business around anything, especially around products. And I know that sounds glib and throwaway, but actually it is easy to build a business around a product or an idea. But actually building it around a purpose and around a community, I feel is so powerful. And that's, it's people like yourself that I take inspiration from. But ultimately that comes from a decision, and it comes from self-belief and determination, which is something that we can all take from our time outdoors, isn't it? Do you find there's a parallel between the things that we were talking about before about determination and kind of propelling yourself into it with the confidence that you're going to get over something, and being an enterprise as well?
Maybe. I mean, I think the things I suppose Waypoints is about a walking pilgrimage or a long walk I did, which in West Africa, but the origins of that walk was that I was feeling pretty lost in my life. I was in a place I didn't want to be. I was feeling really unhappy. I was beginning to feel quite unhealthy, and I'd always been interested, perhaps because of the books I'd read, and the idea of a long walk as a transformative thing, as something that could help you get back on track. And it definitely had a really big impact on me going on that journey. But one of the things I think a long walk or walking like that can be so powerful is because it's always easy to take the next step, or it's never impossible to take the next step. And actually there's a lot in terms of that I learned from it, in terms of how I've tried to build into Tribe or into business, but definitely I suppose the simplicity of life when you're walking, and just focus on the next bit, and then all the little bits can add up together to something that can have this really amazing impact. And definitely I try to, I suppose, bring that into the way I run Tribe or into other areas of life. Now I live in a very different way to how I did when I was doing that walk.
So in the book, you rather dismissively talk about yourself as an office worker, and obviously that was kind of a bit of a reflection on a time in your life, but it's also quite a humble approach. But clearly you're so much more than that. You're a writer, an adventurer, an entrepreneur. How did that come about? How did you be the person that you are? You talked about your dad being a mountaineer. What was your background? What was your upbringing? What led you to the point where you did the journey and you founded Tribe?
I don't know. I mean, I think in a way, a walk is such let's say easy if I suppose you're lucky to have physical ability, but walking such an easy and a simple thing. And I think for me, I I guess through my life up to the point I'd done that walk, I'd never really gone off the, I never really thought about what I was doing, which maybe sounds a bit flippant, but I suppose I'd come from a very privileged background. I was lucky to have gone to university. I was lucky to, after university, to have gone to law school, but I went to law school without thinking about it really, just because it was something I thought was a good thing to do. And then I was lucky to get funded through law school by a law firm, and I started work at a large law firm, and all those things, I suppose, step by step, just almost kind of happened to me. And I'd never really taken ownership of anything. I'd kind of done all right at university, I'd done all right at the law, I'd done all right in my grades, and I think I just felt a massive jolt when I started working properly at a law firm, and I was in an environment where I was maybe working 80, 100-hour weeks. I was suddenly not really having any time to spend outside, and I just began to feel myself deteriorate, I suppose physically, but also in terms of my mind. For the first time, I was really feeling quite unhappy. And it was then that I began to kind of question, I guess, how I was spending my time and where I wanted my life to go, perhaps in ways that I hadn't before. And I was, I can't remember how old I was 24, I guess, at this stage, 24, 25. And I think that was, in a sense, it's a turning point in my life, that I suppose unhappiness that I felt there, and then the feeling that actually I needed to do something about it. And I suppose it happened at a stage where, again, I was really lucky in that I had the freedom. I didn't have anyone dependent on me at that stage. I had enough savings from the law firm to be able to take 6 months off and to buy a flight to Ghana. So I was very fortunate. It's always worth saying, for lots of people, this would be completely impossible what I ended up doing. But I think it was, for me, a real moment of let's see if you can pursue a different path, and let's step out of where you're in and do something completely different and see where that leads. And in a sense, I suppose anything like that's a bit of a leap of faith. And Waypoints tries to unpick a bit, I suppose, how that worked for me, but also the wider, like, not exactly mysticism, but some of the psychology of that, and I suppose the mysticism of the long journey is this kind of transformative thing, which across cultures it is. And for me, it turned out to be, it was a very kind of transformative thing, and it completely changed the direction, well, compared to working at a law firm, that my life took, I guess, or has taken so far.
But I guess so many people would experience that unhappiness and maybe not conclude, actually, I'm going to do something about it, and that something is a 1,000-mile walk through West Africa. So it's easy to gloss over that, but I don't think we should, because I think it's really important. So that was why you did the walk, and that's understandable. But why did you want to write the book about it then? At what point did you go, actually, there's a book here and I want to write it? Because, like, you're running quite a successful and busy business. Did you not have enough to do?
We're trying. I mean, wouldn't. I think you're very kind, but essentially, I'd always been obsessed by books. So since I was like 15, 16, I can still remember the first book I got that actually turned me into someone who, like, loved reading and became, like, I went from someone who was kind of falling asleep at the back of the English class to kind of scrawling all over every book I read, and I really became a part of my, like, when I go in someone's house, from that point I was not looking at people's furniture. I don't look at, the only thing I really look at what's on their bookshelves. I became someone for whom, like, books were a real thing.
So come on, what was that first book then?
No, it was completely different. It's called Blindness, which I'm sure lots of people have read, by Jose Saramago. It's a Portuguese writer, and it's been made into a film. It's about this, I suppose, epidemic of blindness. It's a really amazing book. And I read it in translation. I don't speak Portuguese. My aunt gave it to me, and I just found the language in it so beautiful, and the story amazing. And it kind of triggered me getting so into, I suppose, reading and write. In a sense, writing. And so I had an aspiration, I suppose, to write a book, but wasn't that connected with the trip. I then went away on the journey, and I was always, I carry kind of notebooks with me, and often I would reach the place where I was spending a night, and I pitched my tent, and I wouldn't have a book with me. I was having to travel really light, and I'd have a notepad, I'd have my head torch, and I might write for an hour before I slept. It was kind of the only, in a sense, the only thing I had to do lots of nights. And so I was building up this kind of these journals, and I post them home probably every 6 weeks or something, because I didn't want to carry them. And I got home, and I had these kind of 6 or 7 notebooks piled up. And I say home, that's where my mum lived, and my mum would just put them on my bed. And I did try to kind of write, I guess, a travel book off the back of them, but it just didn't, there wasn't really a story. And I think, especially when you're, you know, a Western guy walking in somewhere like West Africa, there's huge kind of legacy in a sense that I think I say in the book, the world doesn't need another like adventure story by a white guy in Africa. And I just didn't have enough to it. And anyway, so I put it down. I just went on, you know, I was busy with Tribe. But about 4 years after I finished the walk, someone I'm very close to sadly had a breakdown, and I was visiting them every other day for 30 days when they were in psychiatric hospital. And about halfway through that stay in hospital, that person was allowed out of hospital for kind of an hour a day, and someone would come and take them for walks as volunteer. And then walking became a kind of part of that person's recovery. And I began to think about, I suppose, some of the ideas that are in Waypoints a bit differently, and about the impact the walk had had on me a bit differently. And that was when I started to kind of write the book in earnest. And I went about it in a much more focused way, and trying to kind of build whether I've done it well, but to build a story that was a bit more than just, I guess, not an adventure story, but you know what I mean, a bit more than an adventure story, and have more kind of layers to it, and a different focus.
I think it's fabulous. So I'm interested in how you learned to write, or whether you learned to write, because it feels so rough hewn is the word that I've written. It's kind of, it's beautifully crafted, but it doesn't feel like it comes from a particular school or a particular way of writing. Where did you get the stylistic approach from?
That's, I mean, probably a kind way of saying I don't have the stylistic approach.
No, I think you do. I think there is a beautiful style to it, but it doesn't feel like a style that's been taught. Again, I guess this is what I get a sense of you is that you make your own, you charted your own path for this, and I get the sense that you charted your own path as to how you were going to share that story as well.
I think there's a few books that I've never sort of had any writing training. I'm obviously not a journalist, or I haven't come from a kind of, you know, I haven't worked in publishing or anything like that. I suppose what I've done is read a lot, and then the books that I've loved over the years, I think, have, I suppose, inspired me in lots of ways, and that happens in different ways. One of my favorite writers is Ben Okri, and not to compare myself to him at all. Obviously, he's an incredible Booker-winning novelist, but he was one of the writers that the stories he wrote made me really want to visit West Africa. And that was one of the inspirations, again, taking the writing aside, that made me want to visit the areas, the part of the world that I walked through. And then other writers, W.J. Sebald is one of my favorite writers. He wrote a book called The Rings of Saturn, which I think is the most beautiful book I've ever read. I've read that 6 or 7 times, and find travel, but I suppose what I find really interesting about travel books is the way that you can use a journey to connect lots of different ideas. And if it's done well, I don't know if I've done it well in Waypoints, but in some books that I've read, like Rings of Saturn, it's done really well, where it enables, or I suppose it connects the reader to all these different places and eras and ideas. And I love that. And so certainly with Waypoints, I was hoping to do that, to use the thread of the walk, which is hopefully quite a natural, an easy thing to follow from A to B, so a reader can follow that journey in quite an easy way, and then to thread alongside it some of the I suppose the things I was thinking about and the things that I thought had relevance in a book about walking. And quite a lot of the, I suppose, style, if you can call it that, is trying to replicate that kind of free thinking that you get when you're walking, and that kind of stream of consciousness that kind of flows. And I'm sure everyone here can understand as well, that flows when you're walking or when you're running, because I definitely think best when I'm walking or running, and I wanted to kind of try to create that flow of ideas.
I think it worked brilliantly. And we were speaking just beforehand about Cal Flynn's book, Islands of Abandonment, and she does a very similar thing there, doesn't she? She weaves, she goes on this journey and weaves it all together to tell us something more. I'm a bit of a one-trick pony in that they're the books that I like, and they're the books that get featured in Adventurous Inc. And I definitely think you've done that there. So you've talked about Ben Okra's books, and that was one of the things that drew you to West Africa. But you've also talked about that sort of the tension of the cliche of white man walks through Africa. How did you come to conclude it that was the thing that you were going to do? When did you actually go, this is what I'm going to do, West Africa, and I'm going to head out there and get the plane ticket?
I think it was, I suppose, building up the various kind of stages, looking back. I remember writing this list. I was kind of, I suppose, working very hard in terms of very long hours, and I would often be eating kind of 3 meals a day in the office canteen. And then I would often get to kind of Friday, I'd maybe 9 p.m. I'd be out, or 10 p.m. on a Friday, and then I go drinking. And I remember waking up on a Sunday morning, just feeling terrible, just like exhausted from work, and just feeling like I had nothing really left in the tank. And I wrote this kind of list, which I probably end up writing over about a week, but the stuff that I wanted to kind of bring into my life that wasn't there. And it's published in Waypoints, the kind of what it ended up being, but it was almost this really, it sounds quite juvenile doing it, but almost like a really simple kind of rules for life. I was to just imagine myself in a completely different world, how I would want to kind of structure my life differently to how it was there. And that was one element of it. And I suppose that some of the ideas, I guess I'd read a lot of, whether it's like John Muir or Thoreau, or those kind of writers who write about living and maybe connecting with nature in a different way, living in a way that's more connected with the land and with solitude. And definitely those ideas were kind of swirling around in my mind a bit, as trying to find something a bit different. And then I'd also read lots of books about pilgrimage in a kind of non-religious sense, but the idea that a walk could be a way to kind of change your life. And so I think I had the idea of trying to find a different way of life, the idea of a walking journey. And then I actually went to Stanford's, this kind of map store in Covent Garden. At that stage, I didn't have a fixed idea at all about where I wanted to walk. The idea was to try and take some time away and do a walking journey. And I looked at maybe more traditional pilgrimage routes like the Way of St. James or Santiago, and looked at kind of mountain treks in the Himalayas. I just spent all day kind of looking at maps and picking out books. And essentially the area I ended up traveling to, it was because of, over the years before, I'd read lots of books and heard some stories from other travelers, and it was just a place I wanted to, a bit like, so I'm sure lots of people here have done, when you're trying to think where to go on holiday, you've probably got lots of different places you could go, and there's not necessarily any great rhyme or reason why you pick one over the other. And the truth is that was kind of the case with the region of West Africa I went to, which actually, if you look at a map, is a very small region of West Africa, but it was mainly because of the stories I'd read, and particularly Benin, which is the third country I walked through. I'd read lots about, I suppose, the role of folklore there, and it just sounded an amazing place to travel. And I suppose, so that was kind of how it went. It was never felt like a big thing particularly. I suppose the big thing was quitting my job, but it was then buying a flight to Accra. It was plotting a route, which took a while. I then got really into it. I became quite like obsessed with the idea of the journey. So before work, I would read for maybe 2 hours, and I'd be ordering these obscure books about northern Ghana or the places that I would loosely be walking through. And from them, I would be finding out about places that sounded interesting. And I kind of built my route around, I guess, that research. And so it evolved, I guess, step by step. And then it was, what kit do you need? And not very much, is the truth. And I suppose just I love the practicality of planning. Being very fortunate to go on lots of trips since, and whether it's kind of mountain trips or like ultra running trips. And I love the practicalities of like plotting routes and what do you need to take, how do you live, carry as few things as possible, what's the bare minimum you need to kind of get by, and how are you going to pack all that, all the kind of techie elements of it. I get completely I love it.
But what a brilliant way of doing it, though, to kind of pick a place and then go, I'm just going to read around this and see where that reading around takes me, and then something will emerge from it, and clearly it did. What was your of all your waypoint stops? Which is the one where you go, oh, this was just better than I expected. This was the most amazing experience. The sort of thing that I was looking for and never expected I'd really find it.
Oh, so good question. I think it's what I say is that the idea of waypoints, the reason the book's called Waypoints, is that I was kind of building the route from these places that I would mark on a map for my reading, that they became the kind of the markers that I was walking between. And in practice, lots of them were kind of traditional religious shrines. I was really interested in, although I'm not kind of religious in some ways, I'm really interested in that spiritual side, and I think it was a curiosity in me. And I think of all the places I passed, as probably the most affecting I traveled to was a place called Tenzug, which is in the far north of Ghana, so close to the border with Burkina Faso. And it's this visually very striking place. It almost looks like it's being kind of forged from the earth. It's got these kind of rounded walls, there's baobabs around the side, and there's a shrine there in a cave, which for a very long time has been a kind of place of pilgrimage in that part of West Africa. It was actually the last place in Ghana to resist British colonialism, British rule, and the British tried on multiple occasions to kind of shut the shrine down and prevent pilgrims who are coming largely from southern Ghana to visit. And it's got so many layers to it in terms of the history, and certainly going there as an English person, it's pretty horrendous, confronting, what happened there and what I suppose my people have done there in the past. And there's all these layers, but then it's also this incredibly, I suppose, peaceful place. There's lots of, I suppose, religious places can be just incredibly powerful places to visit, whether or not you are a subscriber of that religion. And I remember walking there. It was a tough stretch to get there, because there's go through kind of northern Ghana, it gets drier compared to the south, and the distances between the settlements gets longer. So some days I would walk 35, 40 miles between kind of setting out and camping, as I'd need somewhere to reach a place where I could get water. And so I'd been through quite a grueling stage of the journey to reach it. And it was a very special thing to arrive there. And then I spent 3-4 days with the people there. It was, and it definitely felt like a real break point. It was the furthest north I'd go, and then I was heading south.
It's so the idea of the waypoints is a really interesting one, because I can see how that fitted the pilgrimage together and kind of gives you a purpose. But I think you, probably more than most people, really seem to thrive in almost an obsessive way on the bits in between the waypoints. You that seemed to be what it was about for me. in a much greater, because often lots of people say, oh, you know, it wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey. And sometimes it seems like a bit of a cliche, but here I really felt this yin yang sort of thing between the places that you were going to, but there was so much more experience that you had in the journey of getting there, and that minimal approach that you took, and it almost became like a walking meditation. So how did you reconcile that balance between the bits in between the waypoints and the waypoints, and did you expect that?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I think the thing, I suppose, from the outset that most drew me to doing this kind of journey were, in a sense, the places in between. I suppose it was that wanting to live in a different way. So whether it be like having 40 possessions on my back and nothing more, spending each night camping. I would spend, often I'd be 3-4 days between going into an inside space. That, I suppose, exposure to a different way of life I was really drawn to. And certainly when I think back to the journey, that was the most, I suppose, powerful element of it. And particularly the connections, I guess, it allowed, or it felt like it allowed me to forge, most importantly with people along the way. As I think when you're walking like that and you're just got your stuff on your back, it feels, and certainly there, it feels very, very natural to arrive in a settlement that might be far away from a store or a guest house, and for someone to say, come and set your tent here and let's eat. And that was really, it's a really incredibly welcoming, again, that's a kind of travel cliche, but it really is, you know, Ghana, Togo, Benin are incredibly welcoming places, and it's an amazing place to walk like that. And I think certainly that element of it and those kind of encounters and experiences were what left the most for me, you know, and I feel most kind of glad and lucky to have had those experiences. And often they happened, you know, the places where you'd never really, you know, it might not even be a place on the map. It's the places that are a long way away from the waypoints and the I suppose the road more traveled. And yeah.
And so I was fascinated with how you, with the daydreams and the things that were happening in your mind as you walked each day. And it was quite an elaborate, it almost felt like a way of keeping you going, and that was did that come from your running practice? Because I've not really come across anyone who's certainly written about the mental process in quite the detail that you did about how you'd go over things and replay races and things like that, and then run it again and again and again. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's the two things I don't really know why it happened. There's two things. One, I would often imagine these kind of, it's like survive. I don't know how to describe it, like rebuilding or being part of a much simpler way of life, I guess, and really absorbing myself while I was walking. So I was probably looking for some sort of mental escape while I was walking. And so I would immerse myself, I'd almost fall into these daydreams, and they would be so kind of, I'd experience them in a really vivid way. And I would sort of focus on, I think a lot of them would be like after a disaster or something, trying to kind of rebuild a settlement, and like thinking about how I'd be, it sounds really weird to say, but like building a house or those kind of things where you can feel like progress and you can mentally like check through the steps of the progress. And certainly with running, and I do a lot of long distance running, I do that as well. And when I was walking, another thing I would do was imagine that I was running, which sounds kind of weird, but a big, well, not big goal, but a goal for me at that stage was like running a sub 3 hour marathon. Like I wanted to do that. It's something I've done since, but I would be doing that training in my mind. How quickly would I need to be running? And I do the kind of arithmetic. It's something I know from like other runners that try, but that runners sometimes do. I don't really know why, but maybe it helps provide a kind of narrative that gives your steps a bit more a feeling of progress, I suppose. And I tried to write about it a lot in Waypoints, as it was definitely a big feature of the journey for me. And I found it quite interesting how and why those kind of stories take hold and how you experience them and the interplay. I suppose when you're kind of zoning in and out of a walk like that, where you're for long periods, you're kind of just on your own and you're in your mind, and then you're quite quickly back into the, I suppose, the real world, and how those two things kind of dovetail. It interested me when I was writing about it.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and like I said, I've not really come across someone who's written about it in that same way. I don't know, other folk watching might have come across examples of that. I'm rabbiting away here. Don't forget, everyone, you are welcome to ask your questions. I can see David's been sharing his thoughts on Livingston, and Sian was saying it's a bit like Adam Weymouth. I know what you mean, that thing about weaving stuff together with a book. So, guys, please feel free. Sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, I haven't read Kings of the Yukon. I really want to read it. I've heard amazing things about that book.
I'll pop a copy in the post. I'm like your own personal book curator, which, let's face it, that's what I do. It's a brilliant book. You'll love it. You will absolutely love it. So I will pop one in the post. Really interesting guy as well, and another great writer. Speaking of great writers, I loved, you were unashamedly paying homage to so many other people who've been out there. So obviously we've got the Muirs and the Thoreau and the Solnits, the Nietzsche, but there was a great quote, and it was from Isabel Eberhard, who I've not particularly come across before, but she kind of came to John Muir's conclusion about escaping civilization, and she called it the great fraud of our times. I loved that, but you are definitely part of that literary, philosophical, motion-centered community of people who get out there and process things as you're walking. Claire Nelson, another great book that we read this year, she talked about it as walking helped her metabolize her emotions, which I just thought is one of those great phrases. But I think you said something wonderful about feeling that you could feel the ideas that you'd read. Do you think the ideas came from having read them, or do you think they came to you by the act of walking?
I think one of the things I suppose the book's structured in three kind of main sections: the kind of forest section, desert section, and then a mountain section. And in the forest section, I was walking through southern Ghana, which is predominantly kind of tropical forest and I guess like cocoa plantations, but it's very kind of green, kind of humid. And I'd read lots of books about, I suppose, like I think you guys read, did you read Losing Eden? The book about, lots of books about the power of kind of forest walking, or the Shinrin-yoku, all that stuff. And I was really drawn to the idea that spending time in nature would be this kind of powerful experience. And I just remember like the first few days walking, just feeling so overwhelmed physically by what I was doing, and actually not feeling at all like I was in a kind of Shinrin-yoku forest, but feeling like I had bugs all over me, like I was slipping in the mud, like my stomach was churning, like all I wanted to do was be in like an aircon hotel room, not kind of walking to a village where I was going to camp. And I suppose I remember that feeling of actually books are only books, I guess. And I don't mean that in the wrong way, but actually it took quite a long time for me to kind of adjust to the journey and then begin to let go of some of the resistance I was feeling, in a sense, like physically, but also mentally, getting used to like not having the kind of distractions, like I didn't have a mobile phone, not having comfort, the sort of things that I got used to, and actually drawing back from that and then being at ease with actually all you're going to do today is walk for 8 hours. And in that time, now the things that are gonna, I suppose, draw you on or be really pleasurable are like getting your sip of water, or it was such a different way of life, and it definitely took me a bit of time to adjust to that. Because I read all these ideas, all these books about people kind of finding that in some ways, but it didn't come to me that naturally in lots of ways.
It came to you as a result of hard physical effort, and that I thought there was a parallel there with something that you were saying about the Fulani herder as well, because obviously you came across a young guy and you wrote, I think beautifully, truthfully, this idea that you'd researched their customs and that you thought that this would enable you to have this connection. And again, that was a great phrase you just came out with about books only being books. I think you came to that conclusion while you're out there, and you said, actually, I can't understand this guy. I can't understand his experience because it is so different to mine. And it struck me that was such a visceral revelation that came to you, that for all we read about these things, I guess it's in the experience that it comes to life, isn't it?
100%. I think that to give people a little context, the Fulani are traditionally a nomadic people who live in West Africa, and I'd suppose been drawn to the idea of like nomadism, I suppose through the books I'd read, and I'd spent some time a few weeks before this encounter. I was staying in a monastery in kind of central Ghana, and they had these books there. They had a kind of quite an extensive library, and I've been reading about the Fulani code, which is a kind of traditional, I suppose, code of life in a way as to how a nomad should live. And I was really drawn to some of those ideas. I think in this stage I was at there, they're kind of romantic ideas about like freedom and living minimally and all sorts of things like that. And those ideas were kind of swirling around my head. And as I went into sort of further north in Ghana, there were often kind of roadblocks, and there would be soldiers at the roadblocks, and they would always warn me about the Fulani. So you have to be really careful. There's herders on the stretch of the road, and they would imply that, as settled people often do about sort of nomadic people, that they were somehow dangerous. And anyway, they just built this stuff up in my mind, and I remember really wanting there to be this connection, the idea that me as someone who's walking and living in the way I was, and that I would be a kind of natural kinship there or kindredness. And it was just, it kind of, that illusion shattered quite quickly when I began to pass herders, is just see how different, I suppose obvious now, but and how impossible it is you can't just put a backpack on and book a flight from London and live in a tent for a bit and be a nomad. That's not how it works, and obviously. But I think probably when I was 25, or when I did the journey, I had some ideas, I suppose, about how I could change myself, and that probably weren't realistic.
Yes, but what you actually found out there clearly was real, wasn't it? It clearly was a thing, even if it wasn't necessarily what you expected. I guess you've set that intention, but you were open enough to adapt to it whilst you were on the road and go, well, actually, it wasn't what I thought it would be. But you clearly came away with something, and it's things are never quite as simple as we think they are. I wanted to thank you actually for that piece that you wrote about meeting the Fulani herder, and there was that bit about understanding how you couldn't know him, and then you wrote the phrase about realizing that he had his people's story to give him meaning, and it really stopped me in my tracks, that, and made me think about, well, what's what's our story? And it made me reflect on the changes that are happening in society. And I think this is the great thing about books, isn't it? That they are sources of insight and inspiration. And it's not necessarily what's written on the page, it's where it takes you and what it makes you think. And for me, it made me realize that actually for such a long time, we've been having this disconnect with ourselves and with each other and the planet. But I definitely get a sense that the tide has turned. And I think that's why your book is of its moment, really, because I think it's part of that looking for a new source of meaning and a new source of connection. And I guess for me, it sort of says, well, actually, you went to West Africa to try and discover some of that meaning and that, but not everyone needs to do that, do they? Where do you think we find our own meaning? How do you think we can go about doing that? Sorry, just a small question there.
I think one of the things I felt, and definitely writing the book was interesting, kind of reflecting on it. It's probably the way I was living before, the journey, which was, working at a law firm in London. I'd become quite like unrooted. I wasn't very connected to anything. In lots of ways, I wasn't very connected with the land I was living in. I wasn't very connected with the culture I was part of. I was quite kind of unmoored from all that. And I think that can be quite destructive. And definitely one of the things that really struck me when I was spending time with different communities in the parts of West Africa I was in, with how rooted people were in the physical community they lived in, and that through that there was a real sense of being part of something. There was a real sense of history. There was a real sense of community. There was a real sense of whether it was religion, or there were lots of things that bound people to the people they lived beside, and also to their relatives who died, the sort of ancestors of their community, and also to the land. And I think perhaps in the 90s and the early 2000s, I definitely was just not really connected with any of those things. And I think we've begun more over the last kind of 10 years to kind of realize some of the costs of those disconnections in this country, and where lots of us have moved around and become disconnected from the places we live in. And I think actually I find that idea, like how we can kind of forge those connections, whether it's with the land or really important. And I think we see that across different, like I'm sure if you look at the books that you guys have chosen over the last year, lots of them are actually looking at that question: how are we better connected with the land and with nature, and how are we better connected with each other and who we are? Because I think in kind of urbanized societies, industrialized societies, we really lack something through the way we've become so disconnected.
David's asked a very timely question. So he asked if you'd ever encountered desperate situations, and I don't know if you can see the chat, but he talks about walking in the Spanish Sierras, and he was lost and run out of water, and he heard some goats and followed them to a water trough where they were able to fill their water bottles. And so he's saying, in other words, he had to listen to the landscape. There must have been some experiences like that, not necessarily following goats to a water trough, but where a different sense of connecting helped you out of a sticky situation. Do any spring to mind?
Yeah, I've actually had a similar situation to that in different places in the mountains between like Montenegro and Kosovo, when I was doing a running trip. And I remember coming off, I plotted a route that was kind of open in summer, and we were there in March, and we were in kind of knee-deep snow, and I had a group of like 20 people who I was kind of guiding, and I remember being so nervous, and everyone, we were on the kind of glacier on the mountain for snowfield, not glacier, but probably for 2 or 3 hours, and everyone not quite sure exactly where we were. And I remember seeing a goat herd just as we came off, and just feeling that sense of like so relieved to have to found kind of sanctuary, I guess, and to be safe again. And definitely, I'm trying to think in West Africa, but there would have been lots of moments like that. Water, particularly, was such. It was always on my mind, and it was something, especially in the drier bits of the country. I mean, I had points where I collapsed and blacked out through running out of water, and it was certainly something that you just became acutely aware. Ultimately, you kind of need salt, you need shade, you need water. Those are really the three things you need when you're walking in those kind of environments, and you become very attuned to really simple needs. So no, I definitely resonate with what David said.
So I think one of the things that really struck me about this is that there's almost a fine line between doing something that's sensible and doing, I don't mean sensible in that sort of sense, but there's a fine line between genius and madness, I guess is what I'm saying. And it feels like, you know, this could have tipped over into some crazy obsession. Did you ever feel that? Was that ever something out there and you thought, oh, I might have gone a bit far with this? Or did you always feel that you were going in the right place, and ultimately you were in control, or at least happy with what was happening?
It's a really good question. I think looking back, I think there certainly were points where I became so obsessed with the journey that I was sort of taking decisions at all costs, I will kind of make it through. But I think also I wasn't, I mean, Ghana, Togo and Benin are not dangerous countries. I was, wherever I really came into trouble, there were people to help me. And that was, I suppose, the abiding feeling I have looking back on the journey, is that I was so reliant on, although I thought of the trip as maybe me against the road, or, you know, trying to do this really hard trek, actually I was so dependent on people along the way who would, whether it's like the experience where I did black out in a place called Yape, I had kind of heat exhaustion and someone kind of picked me up off the side of the road, or at every point there were people there to help. And actually I think that safety net, although at points it wasn't necessarily that visible to me, was always there. And actually it made a journey like I did a completely different, I mean, obviously it's different, but compared to something like the Moth on the Mountain, where you really are on your own, and that is crazy what he was doing. And it's so dangerous. What I was doing was never really, I don't think was ever really dangerous. And I suppose I always have faith in other people. And I don't say that sounds a bit pretentious. I'm not saying that in too grandiose a way, but people would often warn me before about the places I was going, or whether it was the people back in the UK before I set out, or whether it was guards at roadblocks about the next sort of 50-kilometer stretch. But I never really felt that. I always felt people would be, you know, friendly, and they always were. And actually, when that's the case, you know, you can't really come to too much harm.
And so you touched on the colonial history of the area before. How did that temper or change your experience of it? Because you mentioned that you got a sense of it, and you were in places where, you know, you could really feel that colonial history. Did you come to any conclusions is a grand term, but did you get a sense of that colonial past and its legacy, and how it's worked its way through, being a white man walking through West Africa?
I think in the places I was in Ghana, Togo and Benin, there's three, like, well, it's not just three, it's a bit reductive, but three kind of big layers to that. There's slavery, which was, as everyone knows, essentially people from Britain, my ancestors, and from other European countries, obviously putting huge numbers, millions and millions of people from that part of the world through like unimaginable trauma and treating them so cruelly. And certainly the coastal areas in the countries I was walking through were really a kind of epicenter of that. And then there's, I suppose, the second layer, colonial occupation. Again, Ghana was a British colony, and Togo and Benin were French. And then I suppose there's the present, where life chances of someone, if you were, say, born or living in a village in northern Ghana, are radically different to if you happen to be born in London. And there's those kind of three I suppose stages, and it seems, I suppose it's a crass thing to say, but it just seems so unfair that we still live in a world where that is the case, where those life chances are so different, despite the fact that there's been this huge cruelty and so much been taken from those countries by people from the countries I live in. And I suppose when you're traveling, it doesn't really affect you people. I found myself always treated so well. I was always welcomed everywhere I went. There are certain places where that history is very visible, be it places where there were, for instance, slave markets, or where there were particular flashpoints, battles with British armies or whatever it may be. And so you become aware of it through those places and through the stories that connect to those places. But what's really strange is, aside from those things, you could almost not realize, but you're not treated in a way that is like, you're from this place which has done this, or you're from this place which is still benefiting from that legacy. And so that's probably not a great answer or a full answer, but it was certainly something in particular, as I came to read more and more about it, that it is very present in lots of those countries, just because they were so much the center, particularly somewhere like southern Benin, and there were still slave forts there. And it's just kind of unbelievable that stuff happened, and to so many people.
Yeah, but I guess none of us can change the past. All we can do is try and make a better present. And clearly, what you've done with things like Tribe is about making a better present, not just for your community, but for other people. And I think that's it's. I was going to say commendable, but that's just such a. It's more than that. It's important and it's valuable. So thank you for all of the stuff that you've done, not as a reparation, but just as a way of doing things right, because you know that things have been done wrong, I guess, in the past. So I guess final question really is what did you want people to take from the book? What did you want to leave them with?
I suppose the book really is about the power of walking, I hope. I mean, it's about a kind of a walk in a part of West Africa that's a really remarkable part of the world, and hopefully there's an interesting travel story there, or a way to show people who might not have seen it that part of the world through my eyes. But I think the most important thing is about the power of walking, and how kind of taking one step and putting one foot in front of the other can be this transformative thing. And one of the reasons I love the idea of a walking pilgrimage is that it's something that's transcends across cultures. It's something that's ultimately, in some ways, the oldest therapy there is. It's been something that's been practiced for so many generations and generations. And I think it's a really interesting way to reconnect with certain things, be it with the landscape, with nature, with memories that might have been there. And I really hope that yeah, people will think about, or readers will think about their own journeys. If yeah, would be, I suppose, my hope from it.
Amazing. Think about your own journeys. What a great way to end, Rob. Let me pop myself back in. What a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sorry we've run on, everyone, but it was how could we get through 2 books, such an interesting journey, and so much insight as well. So thank you, Rob. I don't know if most folk missed it at the start. Rob was saying that his publisher was worried about his word count, and Rob was worried about the opposite way around. He was worried that he wasn't going to hit the word count. But I think it's brilliant. We don't always need these massive thick wedges of books. So something as beautifully concise as Waypoints is often. I know from many of you who've got even bigger back reading lists than me. You welcome a concise book. So I think it was wonderful. I loved everything about it. I loved the way you projected yourself on it, and what you did with the journey, what you did with the book, and I guess what it means about what you're doing in the world as well. So thank you. Right.
Well, I'm really grateful to everyone, because I know it's a mid-Christmas celebrations as well. So thank you everyone for taking the time, and some amazing questions. And it's been really great for me to share the story of Waypoints.
It's been our pleasure. I've just stopped my own video. There we go. Right. Let's take me off pin, and then we can do the old Gamma review. Right. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. We will be back in another month's time with another author. It's going to be a good one, this one. Well, they're all good, aren't they? Let's face it, they're all good. So I hope you can join us again in January. I'm going to do some things differently this year as well. I'm going to halve my carbon footprint. So over the next couple of months, you're going to start getting 2 books instead of 1 book. And I'm going to send half as many deliveries. But you'll hear all about that. But yes, it's the year of halving my carbon footprint, because I've got to do something better as well. So thank you all for your thanks. It's lovely to hear all your kind words. It has been a great conversation. It has been a fab evening. Yeah, and yes, who said they've got loads more books on their reading list now? That was Sarah. Sorry, Sarah. That it's always the danger when you start talking about books, then you want more books, don't you? If only we knew someone who could help with that. Right, brilliant. Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you all again in a month's time. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
And everyone's good. Rob, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Well, thanks for having me. I hope that was I hope it was good. I really yeah. Thanks so much for Moth on the Mountain. I really enjoyed it.
It's all right. I will pop a copy of Kings of the Yukon in the post as well. It's a brilliant book. Really good.
Oh, that's so kind. But honestly, don't worry. I can easily order.
It's fine.
But Tim, I'll let you get on. But we'll catch up soon, and thanks so much again.
And good luck with the spine race. Didn't they cancel it last year, or was it the year before?
Yeah. They cancelled last year, so fingers crossed this year we stay on.
Well, good luck. I shall follow your progress.
Cheers, Tim. Take care.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.